minutes that he showed up today. However, during closing arguments from E. Jean Carroll's lawyer, when Miss Kaplan, the lawyer's name, was making the point that he acts as if the law doesn't apply to him and that damages need to be levied against him to stop him from disparaging Miss Carroll, he stood up and left the room, breaking court decorum. He returned for Miss Hubbard's closing argument on his behalf, but we understand that within the past hour, he also left the courthouse and has departed this location here in southern Manhattan. We know that through deposition video that was shown to the jury as evidence, he believes that not only is he worth the several billion that Forbes has reported his value at, but he says in this deposition video, which he yesterday said he completely agrees with, that his brand is worth significantly more. The Trump brand, he even said the Trump brand is the reason why he was able to win the presidency. So the jurors will have factored all of that in when deciding how much the dollar amount should be awarded to Miss Carroll. His value, his worth, and his braggadocious nature in this scenario has the potential to hurt him.
And again, that verdict is expected imminently. We understand that there is a decision. Errol, hope that you can stick with us. Understand if you have to break away, though. I want to bring in Joseph Tully at this point for analysis. He's a criminal defense attorney. Joseph, the jury just got this case this afternoon. Closing arguments were earlier today. What does it tell you, with all of your experience, that we have a unanimous decision this soon?
Well, it's an incredibly quick verdict, as your reporter just said. It was 3 hours, less than 3 hours, including the lunch break. So that tells me that the jury acted quickly. They acted in unison. It's probably not going to be a good verdict in terms of from Trump's perspective. I don't think that's unexpected, though.
And talk to us also about one of the things that Errol and I have been discussing, which is the relationship, and often contentious relationship, not only with Donald Trump, but also with his attorneys and the judge. How might all of that factor into what the jurors decided? Sure.
So you have to be very, very careful when in a trial, even with a bad judge, where to you it's very, very obvious that the judge is being unfair. They're giving preference to the other side. They're trying to stop you at every step that you're doing. Try to retaliate against the judge or call the jury's attention to that. It's a very difficult process. Again, even if it seems that to anybody, this would be very clear that the judge is being unfair, the jurors always give a lot of deference to the judge. So you have to be very careful when calling the jury's attention to the unfairness, if there is any, because of the deference to the judge. So it's a very tricky situation. Here, I think it was handled just a little bit over the subtle nature that it should have been.
And I also want to get your take on something that Errol was talking about, which is the decision not to specify on punitive damages, and that they asked for $24 million in terms of the damages to reputation, for example, to E. Jean Carroll, but they left that other part wide open. Is that an effective strategy?
I think so. To me, that means they felt very confident that they didn't want to give a number because they felt that they didn't want to give the jury a limit. So if you feel very confident in your case, where you think where you're going to have a windfall, where the jury's going to give you a windfall, then you don't give a number because you think, well, if I give number X, then they might feel that they're limited to that. But if I don't give a number, they might give a number that surpasses my wildest imagination. That, to me, is what I think the strategy was.
I want to put a pin in that for a second and see if Errol Barnett is still with us outside of the courtroom. Errol, are you still there?
Yes, Lana, I can hear you. We're just about to get the dollar amount that the jury appears to have awarded Miss Carroll, but we're going to wait for our teams to confirm the exact numbers. I can read to you the specific charging document.
Yes.
So the very narrow questions that we've discussed that the jury simply has to answer. I'll read it to you as follows, and those numbers, as I'm telling you, are just coming out from our team now. The jury has been tasked on this verdict form to answer very narrow questions. The first question, Ms. Carroll suffered more than nominal damages as a result of Mr. Trump's publication of the June 21st and 22nd statements. Yes or no? That's all they had to determine. Then, if yes, they had to insert the dollar amount of compensatory damages that they award other than for the reputation repair program. So if it was no, they write $1. If it was yes, they give a specific number. They also are asked, if yes, insert the dollar amount for any compensatory damages you award for the reputation repair only. So one for damages as a result of the comments and another for reputation repair. The continuation for question 2 is that the jury had to determine, in making the June statement, Mr. Trump acted maliciously or out of hatred or ill will or spite, vindictively or in wanton, reckless or willful disregard of Ms. Carroll's rights. They had to determine whether that was yes or no. It goes on for the third question. In making the June 22, 2019 statement, Mr. Trump acted maliciously out of hatred, ill will or spite, vindictively or in wanton, reckless or willful disregard of Ms. Carroll's rights. They decide yes or no, and if yes, they had to then go on to say how much, if any, Mr. Trump should pay Ms. Carroll for punitive damages.
And I believe we're getting those numbers right now on
numbers
punitive
from
damages.
The
yes.
jury. Yes. We have, so, and in answering those questions, question number 1, the jurors found yes, and the dollar amount for compensatory damages, $7.3 million. On the second aspect of that question, dollar amount for compensatory damages they award for the reputation repair program only, they determined $11 million. Moving on to the third component, here we go, is that $65 million?
$65 million, yeah.
In addition for punitive damages. $65 million for the punitive component. The grand total, rough math on the back of a napkin here, it seems to be $83.3 million that this jury just unanimously decided former President Donald Trump must pay for the defamation he levied against writer E. Jean Carroll, a staggering amount.
This is all coming in real-time breaking news for us. Errol, appreciate you bringing it to us as it is happening. Given that you have been following all of this, obviously we expect that we will hear something from the former president at some point, but is this a surprising number? More than $80 million in damages to E. Jean Carroll in the second trial.
Well, it's relatively stunning, Lana, unless you think about all the things we've been reporting each day during this trial. The jury has decided, after seeing everything, the testimony from Ms. Carroll, the character witnesses that say that, yes, her reputation was damaged, the evidence, the professor who said it would cost $12 million to repair her reputation, and also all of the fireworks we spoke about between Mr. Trump, Judge Kaplan, Ms. Huber, his lead attorney. The jury did, in fact, find that did color Mr. Trump's character. And so they feel that based on what they've heard, that not only does Ms. Carroll deserve the $65 million to repair her reputation, but in total $83 million to stop Mr. Trump from getting in front of cameras, from making posts on Truth Social as it relates to Ms. E. Jean Carroll at all. Evidently, they did not appreciate, did not like, it did not work in Mr. Trump's favor to have that braggadocious clash with a federal judge during these quite serious proceedings. And so everything we've talked about in the past few weeks seems to be relevant in what this jury has ultimately decided.
Very interesting, Errol, that the jury came up with $18.3 million in terms of her emotional distress, her repairing her reputational damage, so close to the $24 million that her attorneys were asking for. And then on that big question mark about punitive damages to try to get the former president to stop $65 million. I'm going to head back over to Joseph Tully, our criminal defense attorney and expert on this. We were just speaking, Joseph, about that punitive damages number and that big question mark that E. Jean Carroll's team left the jurors with. What do you make of that $65 million and a total of $83.3 million overall?
It's a very significant number. It's very, very big. In breaking down this, just to give the language common sense attributes, 7.3 in compensatory damages. That means, you know, if I burned your house down and your house was worth $1 million, I owe you $1 million for destroying your house. But if now it would cost $11 million to rebuild it, then that is reputation or repair damages, and that's 11 million. And the 65 million is in punitive, and that is just what it says it is. It's punitive. It's to punish someone. It's not really tangible. It's more of an emotional reaction. It's nothing really scientific. This is the jury coming up with a number saying that they believe will fix the situation, or that the defendant deserved for willfully going through with this conduct. So it's basically, stop, this is what you get, don't do it again or it's going to get worse. That's what punitive damages is.
All right, I'm going to bring in now CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. He is following this for us in Washington. Scott, in addition to following this case, there are several other cases that the former president is currently dividing his time between. How does this factor into what is a contentious presidential race that he is in for the Republican nomination at the moment? Possibly a contentious general election race, and this overall question about January 6th, the legitimacy of elections and the transfer of power, given that the former president is embroiled in all of these legal challenges.
I think what's most interesting, Lana, is that this trial was on either side of this week's New Hampshire primary. And it wasn't that the trial interrupted the campaign. It's the trial was a component of what Donald Trump seems to be doing on his campaign, going to courts, airing grievances, making cases to the media that he's the victim of weaponized court challenges, weaponized civil suits, or weaponized prosecutions. You saw the theatrics that we've talked about over the past week. Trump today walking out during closing arguments by E. Jean Carroll's attorney. Trump in a huff, saying things under his breath, being chastised by the judge during the course of this week, all of it being noted, all of it being reported, all of it being a component of Donald Trump's big argument, which is that he is a victim. So the jury has made its voice heard. $83.3 million in damages. That's the payment Donald Trump would have to make. But also, this is a consistent theme Donald Trump's going to have in the criminal cases that await him. Mm-hmm. He argues he's the victim of a politicized prosecution here in Washington for January 6th, in Florida for the classified documents, in Fulton County, Georgia, over 2020 election conspiracy allegations, and right back there in Manhattan in the DA's prosecution of the alleged hush money payments. All of this isn't just an interruption of the campaign. It is synthesized right into it for Donald Trump. And I'll note this, Lana, the very moment this verdict was announced, Donald Trump's campaign team sent out a press release criticizing Nikki Haley about her border policies.
Interesting. Well, and that leads to my next question, Scott, which, as I'm writing this down, trial, trail, 5 letters, the same 5 letters. And it's interesting to see how the former president is using, as you say, one to fuel the other. Does this ultimately help him or hurt him?
Each time he walks into a courtroom, there seems to be an argument that he has a fundraising fire hose that can be opened, that he can galvanize his base, generate campaign donations, but also just rally the troops as he tries to win back the White House. No small feat. I think it's noteworthy, though, especially in this context. You're looking at the doors of a federal courthouse, and you're looking at the doors for a reason. Cameras are prohibited inside. Donald Trump's audience in there was somewhat invisible and inaudible. He could be heard and seen by reporters, but not heard and seen by the public. Some of that changes. Goes down to Georgia, where there's cameras in the court. he goes outside the courthouses in criminal cases where he may want to hold court before the cameras and really put all that on steroids, right? Get himself more attention and lean into that argument that he believes all of this, the civil challenges here, the criminal challenges elsewhere, are targeting him unfairly, and that is so much a thesis of his candidacy.
All right, Scott McFarland, thank you so much. As you can see from our screen right there, we are looking at the very front of the courthouse. We are expecting E. Jean Carroll, the writer who has now been successful in her second case against the former president, Donald Trump, to emerge at any moment. Of course, if she or her lawyers speak, we will bring that to you live. As Scott just told us, the former president exited the courtroom upon hearing that there was, in fact, a verdict. So we are not expecting to hear from him, at least from this doorway. Though, again, if he or his legal team speak anywhere, we will be monitoring that for you as well. We're going to head back over outside of that courtroom to Errol Barnett, our CBS News national correspondent. He is joined now by Graham Cates, our CBS News investigative reporter. Gentlemen, you've both been following this trial. Graham, tell us a little bit more about what you have learned, a little bit more about the color of what was happening inside court.
Sure. As Scott mentioned, this was one of the few moments during this whole trial when former President Trump wasn't in the room. He had previously taken a day off in order to attend his mother-in-law's funeral, but shortly before the verdict came in, he did take off from the courthouse. We began to realize just what the verdict might be when the judge looked at the verdict sheet and said to the foreperson, I just want to make sure the M on these answers, that's for millions. And that's what everyone realized. You could see the defense attorneys' heads kind of droop a little bit, and then they read out the figures. And that $65 million in punitive damages, the attorneys had said, that's the number that you're supposed to come to a figure that will make former President Trump stop saying defamatory things about Carroll. And now I guess we're going to see, is this number enough, or potentially do we go through this again?
Well, on that question about going through it again, Graham, this is the second time that a jury has awarded E. Jean Carroll damages following the former president's defamatory remarks and, as that last case determined, sexual assault against E. Jean Carroll, who you can see right there in the sunglasses. We expect she's about to start moving outside of the courthouse. Again, if she starts speaking, I'm going to interrupt you, gentlemen, but how does this verdict, the $83 million, compare to what E. Jean Carroll received in the last case?
Yeah, well, it dwarfed that number. That was $5 million. That was $5 million, which at the time seemed like a lot. Now we're talking $83 million. And again, the question is that enough?
All right. Sorry to interrupt you there, but we want to hear. We see a very smiling E. Jean Carroll there. We want to hear if she says anything. Let's listen. All right, we hear reporters in the scrum there tossing questions over to E. Jean Carroll, victorious in the jury's decision, awarded more than $80 million in her second defamation case. As our investigative reporter Graham Cates was just telling us, this number absolutely dwarfs the $5 million that she was previously awarded. Graham, I want to allow you the opportunity to finish your answer on that.
Sure. So again, I mean, this is a test, right? Is this the number? Is this the one that gets him to stop saying what now a judge and a jury have concluded are defamatory statements about, again, a sexual abuse that a jury concluded he did? And that's going to be the big question, I think, moving forward is, are we going to hear more of the same from him after now $88.3 million combined between the two verdicts? Or is he going to continue to maintain these things even as he's running for president and as people are asking him about it over and over again?
And I'll just add to that, Lana and Graham, as we watch E. Jean Carroll
I see she's just over your right shoulder there,
what jumps out to
Errol.
me
Yeah.
is that for the first time, watching all of these proceedings, that was the first time that I've seen E. Jean Carroll with a smile across her face, obviously, for obvious reasons. She's been quite stoic in the courtroom. She'd been seated in the front row, very attentive, not really making any emotive reactions. And what we just witnessed right behind us as she left with her legal team, and you see the scrum of press around her, is that obviously she is elated. She had testified that no, her career had been damaged by this constant onslaught of insults from, at the time, a sitting president, now a former president, now a almost presumptive Republican nominee. And so the jury obviously factored that into this dollar amount, not just Donald Trump's alleged wealth, but what he says is his brand value and what he says is his value in the country right now. This number, the punitive number specifically, certainly is a message from the jury to Donald Trump on Miss E. Jean Carroll's behalf as she departs the courthouse right now.
Yeah, so close to us. We actually heard we heard somebody in that large group say, "Doesn't the smile say everything?" And Errol, you've been following all of those little moments that maybe we don't read about in the transcript, but you've done such a great job of bringing us inside of the courtroom, and your point about seeing her smile for the first time. Contrast that with what you have seen from the former president and his body language and how he has presented himself in court.
Well, as Graham can attest to, it's still jarring to this day to see a former president in a federal courthouse facing trials, period. And as we've mentioned, Mr. Trump didn't have to be here, but he decided to be here, he thought, because his presence would make a difference. But once again, he didn't seem able to contain his real-time reactions to the judge, to Miss Kaplan, Miss Carroll's lawyer. In fact, it was this morning's closing arguments as Miss Kaplan was literally laying into him, saying he just can't help himself, he can't control himself, he thinks he's better than other people, when he stood to leave, which in many ways, I think, made her point in front of the jury. And so it has been remarkable to watch, Graham. You've seen many of these things, and Mr. Trump seems to think he can make a difference by showing up.
Yeah, over time we keep seeing him in court now more and more, and you've really seen a big change in his behavior where in the beginning, when he first came to court last April in a different case, he was kind of deferential to the judge and the process. And now as proceedings are going on, you can hear him speaking, you can hear him kind of shouting out sometimes. He's shaking his head a lot, emoting a lot. So there's a big change in his behavior. But one difference with this case compared to all of the other proceedings that he's been to in the last year was the jury watching him the whole time. And that's something, that moment when he got up today in front of the jury during the closing arguments, that was a major moment. The judge actually called attention to it and said, "We will note that Mr. Trump has left the room."
All right, gentlemen, stay right there. We're going to continue following all of this. If you are just joining us now, I'm Lana Zach, and we are following breaking news. A jury has ordered former President Donald Trump to pay more than $83 million in damages to writer E. Jean Carroll. Here's a breakdown of those charges. CBS News, here's a breakdown of those charges. I'm going to check my notes here. It looks like $7.3 million in compensatory damages, $11 million towards reputational repair. We also see that the punitive damages, and this, remember, this number was one that E. Jean Carroll's attorneys left wide open, hoping that that jury, comprised of 2 women and 7 men, would award, as they said, billions of dollars or a drop in the bucket for the former president. They awarded her punitive damages in the amount of $65 million right outside of the courtroom. And following all of that for us, CBS News national correspondent Errol Barnett and Graham Cates, our CBS News investigative reporter. They've been bringing us color and all of the interesting different ways in which this trial has played out. Errol, I'm going to start with you. For anybody who's just tuning in now, what is the major headline following this award of $83.3 million to the columnist E. Jean Carroll?
I think the headline here is that a jury here in New York found that comments Trump made as president as it relates to E. Jean Carroll and her then claim of sexual abuse have come back to bite him, and come back to bite him big time, to the tune of $65 million just for punitive damages. That's that component of this ruling. And I want to call your attention, as Ms. Kaplan, Ms. Carroll's lawyer did, the last sentence of her closing argument echoed the phrases that President Trump made from the White House when he denied the allegations. The final thing the jury heard from Ms. Carroll's team was that now is the time to make him pay for it, and now is the time to make him pay for it dearly. Because when Trump denied that he sexual assaulted Ms. Carroll, he said that it was made up and that people like that who make up sexual assault allegations should pay for it, and that they should pay for it dearly. That was the evidence. That was central to the punitive component of this case. And now that the jury has decided in total that Ms. Carroll should be awarded, what, $83 million, the key question now is, will this work? Does this stop Donald Trump from bringing up her name, from denying that he knew her, and from saying that she was just seeking money? That now remains the open question for a man who proved that he couldn't keep his composure in a federal courtroom despite a previous ruling worth $5 million from a civil jury here in New York that found him liable of sexual abuse and defamation. So quite a stunning development here.
And Graham, what of that question? Where does the former president go from here?
I think that's what we're trying to find out, right? Is if by tomorrow, which is what happened the first time, if by tomorrow he's repeated something similar to what's already been ruled to be defamation, then it's entirely possible that we come back here again next year, because that's kind of the precedent that's been set at this point. They were saying, their pitch to the jury was, choose a number that will make him stop saying defamatory things. And now we all have to sit back and see, will he stop? And the thing that's really complicated about that is he's running for president. So along the way, people are going to ask him about the sexual abuse finding, about the 2 defamation findings, about the combined $88.3 million across the 2 trials that he's now been levied as penalties for his defamation and his sexual abuse. And he has to figure out how to respond to that without creating more defamation, or he can keep doing what he has been doing, according to Carroll's attorneys and according to 2 juries now at this point, which is continuing to defame her. And I think that's really a big question coming out of this. And, you know, we just watched Carroll leave, and we saw her smiling widely with a horde of media taking pictures of her, and it was almost a mirror image of what happened just last year when she won that first verdict. And she talked about that during this trial, how by the next day he had already committed what she considered more defamation, and it was like, to her, like her world was once again turned upside down. So we've seen now this happen twice, the exact same images of her walking out happy with the verdict, and now we have to see if he changes his behavior.
And on that point,
I was going to say, on that
and Lana,
point,
we can now look at the new statement from former President Donald Trump, who has just said, after leaving the courthouse early today, quote, his reaction to this $83 million judgment, quote, absolutely ridiculous. I fully disagree with both verdicts and will be appealing this whole Biden-directed witch hunt focused on me and the Republican Party. This is Donald Trump's statement after this massive ruling. He goes on to say, our legal system is out of control and being used as a political weapon. They have taken away all First Amendment rights. This is not America. What's left out of that statement, I noticed, is nothing, Graham, about E. Jean Carroll herself and her initial accusation.
Exactly right. He didn't deny it. He didn't say he didn't know her. So maybe, I mean, in this first statement, maybe there's some effect from
a little bit different from what we saw from the former president immediately after that first trial. Thank you, gentlemen. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is also following this from Washington. Scott, on that point about the former president's response, you saw how he responded that very first time. How does this seem different for you? And knowing the president as you do, what do you make of his statement?
Oh, a few big takeaways from the former president's statement. First of all, he issued it moments after this verdict came in. He could have stayed quiet for a while and reviewed it a little deeper, but there's three big takeaways. First of all, the statement, as you see it on your screen, doesn't mention E. Jean Carroll by name. Seems unlikely he would do so after getting hit by $83 million verdicts for defaming E. Jean Carroll. He didn't mention her name again in this statement. He does falsely claim that this was a Biden-directed witch hunt. This was a civil lawsuit brought by a private citizen, not by the Department of Justice or the Biden administration. And at the end, you see something that is consistent with what he's been arguing for months now, that this is not America, that the legal system is being used, weaponized against him. He is conflating civil challenges and criminal challenges when he does so, potentially intentionally. But this is part of his campaign. He is making headway, winning primaries as a candidate who is airing grievances and using his legal challenges as fodder for campaign material. It appears that won't change based on that statement.
And Scott, remind us how all of this plays out there on the campaign trail. And is there any difference between this E. Jean Carroll case, which accuses Mr. Trump of sexual assault and defamation, versus some of these other cases which are more political by their very nature?
The civil case here is quite a contrast from the criminal cases, which don't end with dollar signs but end with prison terms. But will this impact the former president politically? There's been no indication of that whatsoever. This trial literally happened during the New Hampshire primaries, the same week in two different states. The jury issued its verdict, but so did the voters in New Hampshire, giving Donald Trump a double-digit win in a Republican primary with a well-funded opponent. So it appears Donald Trump isn't terribly concerned about political ramifications to all this. And in his statement, he doubles down on an argument he has made consistently, Lana, on the campaign trail, that he is a victim, that he is being targeted by a weaponized legal system, and very much late today accused the Biden administration of something it had nothing to do with, a civil challenge by someone he's known for decades.
Well, Scott, we know that this plays very well among those core voters in the Republican Party who are going to determine if it is Nikki Haley or Donald Trump whose name appears next to the GOP's nomination. But how does it play for voters in a potential general election?
It's worth being mindful of that, isn't it? That we're talking about primary voters right now, caucus voters, those who are devoted to the Republican Party and devoted to the Republican Party's leadership. This may have a much different impact when the political composition changes, when it moves to a general election debate with moderate voters, swing voters, women voters, who were critical in Democrats winning in 2020 and 2022, and so much so in 2018. At some point, Donald Trump would have to do one of two things: win back some of the women voters he lost in the last few cycles. This presumably would not help, or further shrink the electorate, which he has proven masterful at. The more you disincentivize people from voting, the more you try to turn people away from voting or discourage voting, the larger and the more impactful your base is as Donald Trump.
Very interesting points. All right. Thank you, Scott. I'm going to go back on over to Joseph Tully, a criminal defense attorney who has been with us as this verdict has been read. So we have a lot to unpack here, and what I'm interested in getting your take on right now, Joseph, is what we just heard from Mr. Trump himself, that he plans to appeal, and that difference in his statement this time, not naming E. Jean Carroll specifically, versus the last time, which led to arguably the second trial. What do you make of the former president's response?
Well, I think it's relieving. I think we could all stand to use some break from almost the constant turmoil that we're getting kind of bombarded with here. So as an attorney, it relieves me that the client, or he's not my client, but that he's listening, that he didn't immediately go out and make the same mistake. We don't need to keep rehashing the same behavior. We need to move on, make corrections, and move on. So the statement was good. I don't know if he intentionally did that or if he had good, effective legal counsel helping him with that. But either way, good for him for not turning around and immediately breaking it. And And I think that he has a right to appeal the case, and I think that he will. And I think that strategically, his legal team will take the longest time possible to do the appeal process. So kind of delay it each step of the way. I think delaying the appeal and delaying an ultimate payment here, if there is any, will be beneficial to him.
And Joseph, you're a defense attorney. If you were representing Donald Trump in these matters, how would you suggest he goes about his appeal?
So appeal everything. He has the resources. He has very talented attorneys. He would need to appeal both jury verdicts here, the first trial, the second trial. He would have to appeal the verdict. So you can appeal the rulings for the judge that the judge made during the trials, rulings that the judge made previous to trial. And you can also appeal the amount of the verdicts and say that, you know, they're not reasonable, and have the appellate court adjust them. And again, the longer this process takes will benefit Donald Trump the more. So I think that a long, slow kind of marathon approach, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint, taking that approach in the appeal process would be beneficial for the client.
It's a marathon indeed. All right, Joseph Tully, I want to thank you, as well as Scott McFarland, Graham Cates, and Errol Barnett. We are going to take a quick break. We are, of course, going to have additional reaction coming up on The Weekender at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll follow all of these and bring you updates as we have them. Coming up next, though, on CBS News, the latest out of the ruling from the World Court. This is CBS News.
Well, let me start with this.
This really
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's
keep
wrong
going?
with that argument?
What have you
Do
learned?
you know why?
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 It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom